Australia Today's Morning Agenda with Natasha Belling.
Welcome to another edition of Morning Agenda. Today we're taking a look at data hacks. Millions of Australian customers have had their personal information and even their medical data stolen at Optus and Medibank. The hacks have put the spotlight firmly on what these major corporations are doing to protect our private information that we hand over in good faith. Not only are hackers becoming more sophisticated, but so too are scammers. So how do you protect yourself from hackers and scammers? And do we need tougher government regulation and penalties to ensure major companies are keeping our private data safe? Joining us today with some important tips and expert advice is tech expert Tim Stackpool. Tim, thanks so much for joining us. More than ever, we realise how precious our data is after what's happened this year, don't we?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think the real trick, Tash, is to make sure that the hackers have more difficulty using or accessing your information than the next person. It's kind of like keeping your home secure. The more secure your home is, the thief is actually going to move to the next house if your house is more secure. And you need to kind of do the same thing with your data. Now, there are some things you don't have control of, okay? So once you hand your data over to another company or an organisation, you don't necessarily have that control anymore because it's up to their security systems to make sure your data is kept safe, hopefully. But what you need to be able to do is, first of all, put some measures in for prevention and then be able to, because you put that prevention in place, be able to make quick changes to the access to your data in other places should that original data get hacked, Natasha. Now, that's the real trick. And I have to say, as with all things, Natasha, prevention is far better than cure every single time. And there are a few things that you can certainly do. I mean, I've talked about this over the entire year, and you must kind of keep your passwords safe and you must not use the same passwords for different services. So please don't use the same password for your email as you do for your banking, for instance. And a good way to manage that is to use what are called password managers. And these sit in your browser extensions. They also sit in your phone. And when you visit websites where you need to put a password in, when you first install these things, it actually prompts you to say, would you like to change your password? And you say yes. And then it comes up with this password, which makes absolutely no sense at all. It's made up of numbers and letters and capital letters and lowercase letters and also symbols. It makes absolutely no sense. So it's not a word that you would recognize. And then every time you revisit that site, it automatically inserts it for you. So you don't have to remember any of this stuff. And I think that's really the number one tip, I would say, Tash, because then if you find out that some information you're given to a telco or to a bank or to a real estate agent has been hacked, you can then go back into your password manager, ask it to change that password for that service, and you're pretty much protected against anyone else hacking that service again, Tash.
Yes, some great tips there, Tim. I guess what we've seen happen with these major data hacks at companies like Optus and Medibank is there's a couple of issues there. Number one, why are we having to give away this private information just to set up a phone account in this situation with Optus? For example, passport numbers and all of these private details. But second of all, what are these companies doing to ensure that our information is protected?
Yeah, exactly. And look, there's two things there. First of all, in terms of the authorization, that identification information needs to be given to a telco, for example, because there are statutory regulations. If you undertake getting hold of a phone service in Australia, you actually have to prove your identity, okay? Things like burner accounts that you hear about in US cop shows, for instance, they don't exist in Australia because every phone number has to be identified back to a person. That's the law. So a certain level of identification needs to be submitted to these companies, such as your passport number or such as your driver's license, in order to get that phone number in the first place. So unfortunately, the telco has no choice but to ask for that information. The other question that needs to be asked is, why do they hold on to this information for so long if you are no longer a customer?
Exactly.
That's a vulnerability as well. I mean, I haven't been an Optus customer for 10 years. Thankfully, I wasn't caught up in the breach in 2022, but it could well be that I may have been caught up in that task, but it's been so long since I've had an Optus account, my information has dropped off. But perhaps it may not have, because at some point in the past, I unfortunately was a customer. Now, what they're doing to protect us, of course, is as much as one would hope they can. But, and I've said this before, and everyone kind of knows it, for every 1,000 white hat hackers you have, and they are the security people that work for companies in order to make sure that they don't have vulnerable databases, for every 1,000 of those people there could well be 20,000 black hackers around the world, trying to breach these systems. So it's always a game of catch up. And Tash, when you receive notification on your phone or your computer to say that there is an update available, that's usually because a vulnerability has been found. And the advice is always run that update as soon as you can, because it plugs a hole in the system. The operating system, like Apple or Microsoft or Google have discovered, it plugs a hole that's been identified that hackers can get into. So you need to do that update as soon as you can, Tash, to make sure that your safety and your security is maintained to the extent that it can. Because once the hackers get hold of that information, they're hitting the internet like nothing else. They're hitting millions of accounts to see where they can get in. They set up these online robots, if you like, that just hit all the vulnerable opportunities, all the vulnerable spaces on the internet, and they will get through, Tash. They will get through. So don't be that one person that didn't get the update done and you find yourself vulnerable because your phone's been hacked.
I think what many customers felt quite disappointed with, especially with the Optus hack, is number one, the lack of communication. Like I know a lot of previous customers or current customers that could not get through to Optus on what to do, what they needed to, which process to follow. Surely the government has to look, and I know there's investigations underway. Optus came out and said, oh, look, it's a very, very sophisticated hack. And then there were allegations saying it wasn't a sophisticated hack. Not only was the door left open, there were absolutely no protections for these alleged hackers to get in. So my question to you, Tim, is surely there is a duty of care here. And if the investigations show that these companies did not have the right processes in place to protect our personal data, it's not the companies, it's ours, what penalties should these companies have to face?
Yeah, absolutely. And there actually is no legislation in place at the moment, and it's in train, but at the moment there's no regulation that Optus perhaps have broken by allowing this hack. It's a loose term of words, but by having this hack, there's nothing to say that they will serve a penalty because of that, apart from customer backlash, of course, and compensation that they may have to pay for any legal proceedings that are taken against them. There's civil legal proceedings. But we don't have laws in Australia today that say if your system has been hacked, then you do face this automatic statutory penalty. Now, that's always the case, that government is always trying to catch up with technology. So it is in train. It will happen. But, I mean, that's the reason why there isn't sort of public prosecution against these companies at the moment. Civil, yes. There are cases that are being raised, but no particular public prosecution taking place. So that's the reason why that happens. But yes, you are right, Tash. There should be regulations in place that say if your customers' data is made vulnerable, if customers are penalised publicly because of what's happened, and we have heard over the past few months that withdrawals have been taken out of people's accounts that haven't been authorised. Perhaps this is due to the Optus hack. We don't know. We're hearing these stories come through the media right now too. But the reason why there isn't great government, penalties being put against these companies is because there isn't legislation in place to do that right now. So the only course that customers can do is to take out civil action against these companies. And that's certainly happening as well right now.
Well, surely that's the silver lining with all these awful hacks, that it certainly put these companies on notice, and the federal government needs to actually take action to make sure they're accountable for protecting our data. In regards to hacks, we've seen, this is extraordinary, new data out saying $4 billion has been lost to scammers in 2022, and that was up 100% on 2021. We've seen Australians get flooded with scammers. They're becoming more and more sophisticated. During 2022 was receiving 4 or 5 calls a day, some alleging my electricity was going to be cut off, that someone had, hacked my credit card. What advice would you give for people to pick out what is a scam and what is legitimate?
Look, question everything, Tash, unfortunately. We have to be cynical in this day and age. It's a sad state of affairs. If I get a message on my phone and I don't recognise the number, or if someone's ringing me and I don't recognise the number, I don't answer it, unfortunately. I have to ignore it. Most of the time, the call is a scam call or a spam call. If it's an important call, someone will always leave a message and I'll call back. But you're right, I get text messages that say there's a pending delivery to my home, and they need to verify some details, so please call this number back or click on this link, which is even worse. I mean, you definitely must ignore all that stuff. If you're receiving emails and you're worried about those, generally, look, they can be very sophisticated and use letterheads and logos that look very legitimate. But generally, there's a problem with the language. The English is wrong. There are typos in there. There's something amiss about them, Tash, and you do have to be cynical and cautious about these sort of things. I think that's the best advice I can give. I mean, there are some services around, some apps. If you're a Google Pixel phone user, that phone itself, because it's attached to Google, because they have such a database of information that they have access to, they will generally flag the call as a spam or scam call while it's ringing. It's a service. It's kind of like a feature of the Google Pixel phone, if I can say. The Android, Samsung phones have those as well. You don't necessarily get that sort of service if you're an iPhone user, but you can use an app which will kind of identify as much as possible whether something is a scam call or a spam call too, Tash. But it is really tough, and they're very sophisticated. Look, I've even seen during the whole COVID pandemic thing, I was getting text messages that indicated that I've been in contact with someone who's had COVID. Click on this link in order to purchase some official rat tests, and I've clicked on the link and it's taking me to a website that looks very official, and I have to pay for the rat tests on that site. But of course, people do that. They put their money through a credit card or a PayPal account attached to that site, and the rat tests never come. They've been fleeced of that $50 or $100 to get those official rat tests. Unfortunately, I saw that, but I shouldn't say I was very impressed with the
they look
debate
really
and the result.
legitimate. That's the issue, isn't it?
They did look very legitimate. I've even seen that with MyGov accounts too, that the MyGov website has been cloned beautifully, and it looks very much like the official MyGov site, but you put your details in, of course, and all the hackers are trying to do is get your login details, and once they get those, you get a result on the web page which says your login has been unsuccessful or whatever, but they've already got your details by then. It is tough. If I was to give advice to anyone, I would just say be cautious, be suspicious, and be cynical of anything that comes through that doesn't quite look right or feel right.
Tim, the bottom line is you need to question everything because the hackers and scammers are becoming incredibly sophisticated. If you want to know if you are part of a scam or a hack, or you want to know more information, there's some great websites we can go to.
Yeah, there's a security guy, an Australian guy, who's actually set up a site. It's kind of connected with that 1Password service that I talked about before, but it's called Have I Been Pawned? It's a really unusual name. I mean, pawned is like a typo of the word owned. That's Have I Been Pawned. The pawned word is PWNED, haveibeenpawned.com. And you can put your details in there, just your email address or your phone number, and that will actually tell you whether those details of yours exist on the dark web, if they have been released publicly. And if they have, some service that you've been attached to has been hacked, and it will list which of the services you were a part of that have been hacked. What you then do is you go into those services and you change your password straight away. So that information that's available on the dark web cannot be used against you. If it's all got out of control and you are an obvious victim of identity theft, there is a not-for-profit organisation called ID Care. It's idcare.org is the web address, and it's actually sponsored by various authorities, police departments, banks. They all kick the tin in order to support this service. Works in Australia and New Zealand. If you go to those guys, if you think or you definitely know you've been a victim of identity theft, you can go there and they will go through a procedure for you to help wrestle your identity back and take care of your credit rating and change things with the various banks. So there are systems in place to help you if you have been a victim. But of course, as from right from the outset, prevention is better than cure, Natasha.
Absolutely. Great advice as always. And thanks so much for those very useful tips on how we can stay safe. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tash.